Welcome back to the Compassionate Capitalist Show. Today we're going to talk about disruption in traditional sectors, how you use technology to do that, to disrupt an industry that nobody thinks can or should be disrupted. They're perfectly happy with their mousetrap as it is because they've created an artificial let me just I don't know how to describe it exactly, but sort of an an artificial pent up demand. I mean, or this is just the way it is, and nobody has an alternative, so they just live with that. Of course, y'all don't have any idea what I'm talking about, so let me tell you what I'm talking about. Because my guest today is the man. He's the co-founder of a company that is disrupting and transforming a traditional industry. And we're going to get into all of that because what was fascinating about discovering his story and unpacking his story is the very methodical way that he went about identifying an inefficiency in a market and then building a business. It wasn't something that he already knew that said, I just want to be in this business. He found a business that was primed for disruption or an industry and is actually doing that. Right. So is your curiosity up enough that you're going to keep listening? Because here it goes. My guest today is Faisal Abid from Eirene Cremations. That's really, I had the same reaction when I first had the opportunity to meet Faisal and talk about this. His journey is one that's marked by a relentless pursuit of innovation and a mission to transform industries that have traditionally been slow to adopt technology. As co-founder and CTO of Eirene Cremations, he's at the forefront of leveraging cutting-edge tech to revolutionize the traditional industry of death care, right? So in this case, it's disrupting death care. And I never thought I would say those three words together, but his journey is marked by dual experiences, his profound tenure with, he actually started out defying conventions with his decision to step away from a software engineering degree to go into a tech job with a startup going well along that led to a sweetheart deal in Google, right? That it's but that disruptive innovation within that thing gave him a burning desire to make a change in the world. And that caught him, and he started looking for an opportunity like what he's doing right now. And that is why we're here today. So welcome, Faisal. We're going to let you connect the dots and fill in the blanks of what I just described. So what was it that first made you say, I don't know that I need this college degree path. I'm going to be able to be a technology disruptor, right? Even without the credentials there. So talk about that first, and then how that led to, being a part of one of the most disruptive companies around Google in the way that they, drive so much technology today, and leaving that to go do this other thing, to take the risk of doing a startup that I can tell you, I bet, and we're going to get into how you raised capital for that because you're really in a fantastic growth mode. But I would bet, a whole lot of investors were like, what? So yeah, I'm going to stop talking and let you tell the story. Thank you for
Well,
being
for
on the
your
capacity.
first question, I mean, it was never, I kind of knew in high school that getting through 4 years of university was going to be hard for me, not academically, but more so to keep my curiosity there. Because even in high school and late elementary, I would say like grade 8, I was just pirating software online and learning how to code. Visual Studio was expensive back then, so I pirated it off Kazaa and started learning how to write BASIC, and I think it was like C# had just come out. So anyways, I learned programming, and then high school I started getting into something called Cold Fusion and Flex, and then I even got approached to write a book, which I wrote a bunch of chapters in this book. I think a third of the book is mine, or half of the book, called Flex 3 in Action, and which was always fun because I got to tell my English teacher, hey, look, I wrote a book. So when all that was going on, one of the trends that I was noticing, and in hindsight, it's easier to say this, but I guess subconsciously, it was this trend of like things are changing and I'm able to do stuff without actually having that traditional degree, right? Because I was playing on the same level, like the same playing field. I was the same level as my co-author in the book, who, was a 15-year veteran in software engineering, was at a successful job, or just the people I was interacting with online on forums. They weren't like just some randos. They were pretty successful. I mean, for a while, I wanted to work at Adobe, actually Macromedia, and then Adobe bought Macromedia, and then I was like, okay, I'll work at Adobe because I was so fascinated by their engineering culture. So when university came along, I remember sitting there in first year university, like 3 days in, and going, well, and I saw like a article about Android and how Google had launched Android, and the phone wasn't out yet. It was just the
Wow.
SDK. It was like probably like a month away from launching, and they had kind of solidified it. So I was like getting excited about, wow, I don't have an iPhone, it's too expensive, but Android seems to be some cheap thing that might work out really well. So I started to learn Android, and I said, let's build a business on Android. I didn't know anything about business. And so I started building this idea called the social marketplace, where the idea was, Karen, you and I are friends. So I get a notification for Angry Birds that Angry Birds just launched. And I'm like, I see Karen playing that a lot and she knows me. So maybe I can ask her just from the app itself, press a button, you get a notification saying, Faisal wants to play Angry Birds. Do you think he'll like this game? And the idea was, it's better than a 5-star review asking a friend who has played this game. So, I mean, I don't know if it's a good business idea. It was a fun thing to make. And so I built this, and I got a small little seed investment as well a year later. And that's when I said, maybe I'll stop going to school temporarily, tell my
Oh,
parents, and then I'll come back. I mean, in my mind, I didn't want to come back, but I can't just go and tell my parents, hey, I'm out. So I said, I'll be back soon. Just 1 year. These guys are giving me, and I'll tell you the number. They gave me $30,000 as seed, and that was exciting for in 2011 or 2010 for an 18-year-old or 20, whatever, however old I was, getting $30,000. I'm like, wow. And I had a co-founder, a bit older than me. So, anyways, we got excited and we started building on this. And then the business model eventually changed to Netflix for apps. And the idea was you can pay a subscription fee and you can get all the apps. And the way we used that $30,000 was, first we paid ourselves $400 each a month. And then the leftover, we basically bought the apps in bulk. And so we said, hey, so and so game maker, give me 100 licenses of your application. And then the way we had worked out the business model with our very little numerical understanding was, if we can get enough subscribers and we have 100 licenses and we make a deal for 100 licenses, we can probably be profitable soon. That did not happen. We ran out of money very quickly, but it was a good experience for two reasons. One, the technology was excellent, but the business model was terrible, and we didn't know how to manage. We didn't know how to run that business. And so what I did was I said, I need to learn business, and I know how to do the tech. And so I left that company and I joined Kobo. I interviewed a bunch of places that week. It was the week of my birthday, March 26, 2012. And I interviewed a bunch of places. And then on March 26th, I got the job at Kobo. And they said, hey, LinkedIn and a couple others wanted to fly me out to California. I didn't want to leave California. I mean, I didn't want to leave Toronto to go to California. So I was like, I'm happy in Toronto. I'll go to Kobo. I actually didn't really know what Kobo was doing. I was just happy getting a job and not earning $400 a month. But I joined Kobo. I joined as an intermediate engineer, and I got to learn a lot about working in a team. But that still didn't solve my problem of learning business. And so what I did was I started reaching out on LinkedIn to a bunch of entrepreneurs that I had all met in the ecosystem. And I said, I'll work on your app for free. I'm working at Kobo right now. They're paying me. In the evenings, I'll just build your app for free. Give me some equity. But more than that, I just want to hang out with you guys and know why you're making certain decisions. And a couple people responded, and I started working with them. And that's kind of how I got this like mentorship, forced mentorship by doing free work for
Yeah.
very, very little equity. I mean, I just really, all those businesses didn't work out. I got zero from it, but I learned how to manage a business, run a business, and kind of see the whole life cycle very, very close up. And all those entrepreneurs, actually, funny enough, are very successful now. And so I did that. And one of the things I enjoyed doing a lot was just giving talks. So whenever I learned something new technically, I just gave a talk. And this was when Google reached out, and Google said, you're giving talks on technology that a lot of people aren't talking about at Google, because Google had just come out with something called Dart. And Dart was this small language that no one was really talking about, other than a couple people at Google and myself. And I was like the only external one talking about it a lot because I was very excited about it. I still am. It's a great language. And so Google said, do you want to be part of this program called the Google Developer Experts Program, where you can give all the talks you want and we'll cover your travel expenses and stuff, specifically when you're traveling internationally. I said, fantastic. And I get exposed to Google. So I'm included in internal like Google Developer Expert chats. You get to meet a whole bunch of smart, excellent people. And so that got me associated with Google. I got to learn how Google works internally just through osmosis of working with project managers there on the Dart team, on the Flutter team. And so that was a great experience. And what that did to me was I started learning, business through all these entrepreneurs. And then that kind of gave me confidence to go, I'm going to just start taking a bunch of risks. Worst case, I will actually just find like a good, like a lot of engineers, it's interesting. You're such in a bubble and in a privileged bubble where a lot of times your worst case as an entrepreneur, if you're inside of tech, is getting a high paying job at a tech company, right? That's like someone's best case, and that could be an entrepreneur's worst case. And so I said, I'm going to start taking a lot of risks. So I worked at a company called League right after, and League was a health insurance company founded by the co-founder of Kobo. And then I got into this AI because I saw AI was booming, starting to boom around 2015. So I got into this AI company called Zoom.ai. And that's how I got into AI machine learning. I didn't really learn it through school. I just said, hey, founder, I don't know anything, but I'll just like work on this. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. And you know what? 2.5 years later, I was CTO at that company. I had figured out how to build this. The business didn't work, but we had learned how to build that company really well. I learned about B2B. I learned about so much from that founder, Roy. It was just how to go through, like we raised multiple funding rounds. I was involved in all the discussion. So this was again an act of like forced mentorship where I'm like, hey, I just want to work here. And then I move up, I do a bunch of other things. I never try to stay in my lane. I'm like, I'll do this as well. And so going to Eirene, it was very interesting because I had learned about all these very interesting niche businesses. Some of them aren't niche like ebooks, but some of them are niche. Like, we started doing when League, which is now a health insurance company, or when it originally started, the idea was like a league of professionals helping you every day to live better. And I was fascinated by it. I'm like, who really wants this? But I was like, let's see, right? Let's see. And clearly no one wanted it. That's why they pivoted into health insurance, and they're doing fantastic. But again, it was this idea of iteration that I really enjoyed. And so when I was in Japan, I started to I met a friend there, and he was running a business which was Buddhist cremations, but like done in like an Expedia style. And he was a tech CEO. He was actually Rakuten's one of Rakuten's leaders that was sent to Canada to be a CEO at Kobo when Rakuten acquired Kobo. And so I was fascinated by this idea that you can do tech in death, just like you were at the start of this conversation. And one of the very interesting things that I learned the hard way, I guess, multiple times, is the businesses and side businesses that I've done that have worked really well and have generated like a bunch of side income for me are things that I am very good at. The things that have not worked are the things that I'm not good at. Like the technology is great, but if I'm not good at that specific vertical, there's no founder market fit. And so the thing, and then there's
Wait,
things that
so
work.
you the tech was sort of like a base level that you would be good at, but your success within it was based on whether you knew the market.
The market, yeah. Whether I knew
Okay.
the market or whether I worked with someone that knew the market. So there was two side businesses that I ran. One of them, I knew the market really well. Another one, my co-founder at that time knew the market really well. And so I knew that death wasn't something that I knew really well. I mean, we're all gonna die, but I don't know I didn't know at that point in 2018 what how you even start a business in death care. Do I just like reach out to a funeral home? So through pure luck and chance, I ran into my co-founder whose father was a funeral director. And she herself was also thinking about building something in death care, just growing up in that industry. And so we both met, we started talking, and over the course of a year, as we chatted more about this idea, we kind of figured out how do we take an idea that is building, we knew we had to build a technology first business in death care. So the way we saw it was we're going to build a tech company and our first product is going to be something to do in death care. Whether it's B2B, B2C, we have to figure out something. So we started doing a lot of research on the market, a lot of just talking to people, but also attending what they call death cafes. And death cafes are specifically where it's not like grieving or anything. It's specifically people talk about their relationship with death and when they lost somebody or if they might lose somebody, but it's more of like a not neutral but more less emotional discussion. It's not like a grief counseling where someone's sitting there and pouring all their feelings out. And so it was very interesting because I got to learn a lot about the industry through multiple death cafe sessions and then talking to industry experts. And what you'll find is the industry is comprised of some of the most kindest and smartest individuals that were all saying the same thing, which was the industry is antiquated. They're looking for a way to keep up with the consumers because the consumers have evolved. The industry did not evolve. If you look at how you think about it like how Uber took over taxis, right? The taxi industry has been the taxi industry since taxi industry started, like say 100 years ago, right? The idea was you stepped out, you put out your hand, and a cab would see you and pick you up, or you would call a phone number. They would say, okay, we'll be there in like 30 minutes, but hopefully you have no idea. And what Uber did was they didn't replace how you get from point A to point B, right? You're still sitting in a car. You're still going in a car with a stranger, a licensed stranger now, but you're going to point A to point B. What they changed was the experience, which was from the time you think about you need a cab to getting inside a taxi. What is that experience? And so
And
that's
also the whole crowdsourcing of it.
the
Right.
crowdsourcing
That was a huge thing.
for
That
sure.
was one of the first things that you could get random people
Of course,
to, do the gig economy. So there was like a timing there, which
yeah,
I think in yours, as we get into the problem that you identified to solve, there's been there's a bit, the shift in our um personal relationships that we don't all live in the same city like we used
absolutely.
to with our parents or our other family members.
Absolutely. And so what we said was, can we create that magic experience that Uber has, but for death care? Because families don't want to get into a car, drive around, ask a bunch of funeral homes their price quote. How can we be a funeral home that is all digital and we provide the Eirene experience while and using, and from my aspect, it was leveraging like the past 12 years of tech experience that I have on, building products, and even my co-founder on building products and building technology, and specifically how we build AI, ML apps. How can we apply all these concepts to something so human and so antiquated where no one has even thought about doing this? And so that's where Eirene came from. Eirene just as the name for a goddess of peace. And the idea was a state of peace. And so the idea was, can we create a state of peace through our technology, right? Without
Right.
the
Because
consumer.
when you're talking about the experience, the whole thing experience of people getting cars, the whole car piece of that. But I mean, I know when I had to go through the process of making those decisions for my mom after she passed. Nobody really looks forward to going to the funeral
No,
home and
no,
picking out whatever. And it's like, but nobody's ever thought about having a digital way of doing that. So,
exactly.
until but it's like, that's like nobody, it's like, just like you don't like to, they've transformed the way you buy cars because people don't really like to go and sit and haggle in a showroom and do all that kind of stuff for buying a car. So,
Exactly. So
it's
our
still there
families,
for the people that want it, but for the people, for to remove the inefficiency, change the consumer experience, and to be able to scale, which funeral homes can't scale, right? So those three fundamental problems that you have to do if you're going to be a tech company. So it's how did you identify those as the actual problem, and then get the and then figure out how you're going to solve it, figure
yeah,
out how much money you're going to need to solve it, and then get that money to start to
yeah.
solve it.
And it's interesting. When we spoke to almost everyone, we spoke to funeral directors who are working on the funeral home side. We spoke to consumers who recently lost people. They all said the same thing, which was the problem was people, when they're grieving, they're not thinking rationally. And then you're taking an irrational person who is grieving, and instead of them focusing on their family, their loved ones at home, they're having to basically go out and be vulnerable and speak to a bunch of people and make decisions in that vulnerable state. So we said, okay, let's become a online funeral home. Let's use our tech expertise to automate everything except for the human aspect, which is the funeral director talking to the family. And on the back end, just in the example of Uber and taxis, we still use the same crematoriums every other funeral home uses. So it's the same crematorium, same transfer service, because it's all regulated in Canada and in America and around the world. It all obviously regulated. And so we said, let's start this. So 2019, at the start of 2020, actually, or late 2019 is when we applied for a license. So it's a state, and I mean, it's a provincial and state in America license. And so we applied for a provincial license in Ontario, and it took us almost a year to get it, even though the license technically is supposed to take 4 months or 4 weeks. And that's because the industry, again, is so old, they don't understand how Eirene fits in that business model, in their legislation, the Eirene business model. And so there's nothing stopping Eirene from existing. It's just that the regulators had no idea how can we take Eirene and have it fit inside of this framework. So after a lot of lobbying and talking and just pressuring the government to get involved, we were able to get our license in December of 2020. And since then, we've scaled across Canada. And this is how we've been able to scale. It's not like, the average funeral home has a radius. They have to operate in a radius. That's because that's just the physical location they can serve. Eirene, by being online, can serve across geographic boundaries as long as we're licensed in that area. And so if someone in Ontario, which is large, if someone from Northern Ontario wants to use Eirene, they absolutely can, because on the back end, we're working with crematorium partners across the province, across the country. And in terms of our funeral directors, they can have that meaningful human conversation 24/7 because they're working from home, they're working from our office. They can be there for the family whenever the family needs it. And then the technology, we built something called Funeral OS. The technology there leverages the latest state-of-the-art tech. Because primarily my background in ML and AI, we've been able to implement a whole bunch of algorithms and a lot of cool techniques where the funeral director doesn't have to sit there and do a whole bunch of work to make the arrangement happen. They can focus on the family, and then the funeral OS basically notifies the funeral director saying, hey, everything you spoke about, all the information that's been collected, is this correct? As the funeral director says, yes, it's correct, then it triggers a whole bunch of processes that, dispatches the transfer service, updates our system, whole bunch of different things that happen.
Project management of the process of somebody in
Exactly,
their
right?
end of life.
Exactly. The whole A to Z up until the remains are hand delivered back to the family. Funeral OS takes care of everything. All the funeral director needs to do is validate that each step that because funeral director will never take action. Funeral OS will never take action on its own. It's basically saying, here's everything. Are you ready for the next step? And the funeral director reads everything, validates it, ready for the next step. And there's this, what we call a checklist, manifesto checklist, basically, that is this like, a record trail where we know exactly at what point what happened. And it's very interesting because when we hire funeral directors, they're blown away at how efficient they are, because the average arrangement sometimes can take up to 5-6 hours for a family. At Eirene, the actual arrangement paperwork and all the other stuff that happens takes like 10 minutes. Most of the time is spent with the family, which is the important time. So a lot of people, it's funny, when we were talking about fundraising, when we started talking to investors early on, they thought, well, it's very impersonal. How you're a tech company, this is such a personal process. Why would anyone use you? But what's funny is we've used technology as much as possible to give back more personal time for the funeral director to work with the family, right? And technology deals with all the impersonal stuff.
Right. So, excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat.
Yep.
So I think it's just fascinating that you had a chance encounter with somebody talking about their experience in ooh, excuse me.
Yep.
When you don't cough and then it just gets worse, right?
Yep.
So and then looking into it, then you meet your co-founder who has small business experience of the personal hands-on a process. But when you and I talked before, and I think probably most of our listeners don't understand this, the thing that I thought was amazing, because you get, like, in a whole lot of places where you have a supply chain issue where there's extra capacity on one side of it, and then you have a bottleneck in this other side of it, and so you have people dying, people that within the same town or outside the town that need
Yep.
to make reservations, or make the preparations or whatever, based on the deceased preference, and they're having to go make an appointment, and when can they schedule stuff here, and then come to find out, like, the hourglass that you have people that like to go ahead and get it scheduled. Then they can have the flexibility of their life celebration when they want. They could have the flexibility of how they're going to remember this kind of a thing, but everything seems to be dictated on their ability to handle the the final what happens with the final remains. And you got the bottleneck So there's the people, the bottleneck of the funeral homes that are licensed and limited within specific geographies. And then you have the crematoriums, which I was amazed that they're under capacity. They could handle so much. That's why you're able to talk about like the difference of the average of what a funeral home does and
Yeah,
then what you now do. You're a year and a half maybe and fully operational. When you got your license, you probably spent a year developing it, so 2 years fully operational. And how much volume you have reached in that short period of time. Because,
yeah,
and this is really when you see there's an inefficiency in the marketplace and somebody hits it with the right solution, you get the kind of business that you get right now, that you start to be able to ramp up the way you're ramping up.
absolutely. The average funeral home, without getting into too specific numbers for Eirene, the average funeral home does, upwards of say 150 cremations a year, right? Eirene is doing that in a month and much more than that in a month. And that's just because we're able to scale up so fast. And that doesn't mean, but here's the interesting part. At a funeral home, if a funeral home is doing that much, then if you take, let's just say 100 and you divide that by 12 months, you can, or how many working days there are, you can see that the funeral director specifically per day isn't doing that many arrangements, right? Because there's no need for them to constantly be doing arrangements because that's just how much volume they have. But if we're doing 2, 3, sometimes even 4, actually, times that in a month, then what's happening is the average funeral director has never experienced, like in the industry, they've never experienced that type of volume. But that doesn't mean that we've hired 500 funeral directors to deal with this volume. Funeral OS is dealing with almost all of it. The funeral directors are there to talk to the families, explain to them their options, be there for them 24/7. But sitting down doing all this, like, manual stuff, let the AI do it, right? We just have, it's funny because the funeral directors laugh at it, but like there is essentially this AI, funeral OS AI, that's running in the background, that's figuring out what's happening, suggesting things, and then waiting for action to take based on what the family wants, based on what the funeral director says is the next step. And so that's how we're able to scale. And that is the market efficiency where people, the funeral homes haven't adapted simply because there is no incentive to adapt.
Yeah.
They're not dealing with this much
Right.
volume.
Yeah, because that's what I was talking about. This whole,
Yeah.
they're making good bit. They're a lifestyle business. It's probably been in the family for a while, a lot of them. And then they do have relationships with the people in their community. So it is, those kind of things. But with the nature of just how we have trained, where people, are not in the same city as their parents or somebody they might have to make arrangements for, they don't have the relationship to be able to walk in there and make that. They're not, and
Absolutely.
they may or may not do something. I mean, I have friends that their parents are way far away, and it's like most of their friends there, it's like, who's going to come to a life celebration, right? So it's better for them to, as a small family, to be able to take the remains and go to a memorable spot and have a, I mean, it becomes, every family gets to decide how they remember and when they remember, because the rest of the constraints on the system has been taken out of it, of what they had to change their lives and their choices based
Yeah.
on what was available there. And the thing I also thought, and I think this is really good for the listeners, particularly the entrepreneurs that are listening, sometimes entrepreneurs try to do everything. They'll get, and so, what you've done is you establish what's the core problem. Let's solve that problem. And because, I would never go and look for an online, I mean, because the fact that you have created an entire new way of doing something, so that, people aren't searching for a way to solve the problem in the way you're solving the problem there. But so they've discovered you, and maybe a lot of it's probably word of mouth. But then you layer in each transaction becomes more profitable because you have figured out, well, oh, we could offer this to them, or they say, oh, I would like a decanter, and things like other things that you, so from a, the traditional, what investors always look at is like, what's your lifetime value of a customer,
Yeah.
right? And what's your what's your cost of your cost of sales, or your cost of customer acquisition, and you have this ability to layer in things that are more profitable within that process, but that also brings better sense of customer service. Your funeral directors have that title, but they're really high level, caring customer service people that know how to project manage the experience and relieve the anxiety for the family that's trying to make those decisions.
Absolutely. And one of the things that one of our core principles from day one was we will never upsell. We want to be the most transparent funeral home possible. Like sometimes we're a bit too transparent where the regulatory body is like, hey, we got a complaint, but from another funeral home. But we're so transparent where you can go on, you can request a price list for your province, and see exactly where the money is going. If you're paying 2,500 or $3,000, you can see what the breakdown is. There are no hidden fees. There's no like, gotcha. We told you it was 3,000, but actually it's 6,000 because here's the fine print. None of that. And so technically, a family can make an arrangement. Say you lose somebody in the hospital. You can call from the hospital or at home, wherever you are. You can make a phone call. And 10-minute phone call or 5-minute phone call, actually, and that's it. You don't have to call us again. You can go back, focus on your family. You will get an email with all the information. You sign right there. Once the email is signed, your loved ones is picked up, taken to the crematorium, they get cremated, then they're brought back, they're hand delivered to you at your home or wherever you are. Like you never have to leave your house. Families appreciate that so much because there's already so many things happening. The funeral home shouldn't be the thing you're dedicating most of your time to. It should be your family. And so we have, for example, we built a status tracker where you can get, say at 3 p.m., you're wondering, where is my loved one right now? Are they cremated yet? You can just click on that link and see exactly where your loved one is and what step in the process they're in. So there's another level of transparency.
Yeah.
There. It's always there for you.
Also, I did not know about this, but because there are some faiths that cremation is not something that they would ever permit, there's another alternative, aquamation, which I had never, did I say that right? That's what I never had heard of that before, but because, I'm not in one of the faiths that would, have another, but I think it's a good alternative for anybody, because sometimes people, even though it's loud, they just don't like the idea of burning. Right. So
absolutely. And I am curious what those faith thinks about aquamation. It is such a new process, but yes, it's a gentle flow of water. It's like 95% water, 5% lye, and it just breaks down the organic matter over, just a small gentle flow of water. And what's nice about it is that it's eco-friendly. And like you said, a lot of people just don't want to think about cremation. There's fire involved. It just doesn't feel like a pleasing process to some. And so, yes, people are using aquamation. It is rising. And it's not for every family. That's totally fine. And again, it's not something, it's funny because aquamation is $2,000, $3,000, cremation is $2,500. Going back to the upselling, we never upsell. If a family says they want a cremation, that's what you want, right? If the family says they want aquamation, that's what you want. We're never going to say, hey, have you thought about aquamation? It's so-and-so, XYZ. No, that's not the point. The point is,
the nice thing about your website is that in the privacy of their own home,
exactly,
they can read and learn about it and
absolutely,
don't have to ask questions or feel like they're dumb asking questions. you know,
No.
and when they're ready to talk to somebody,
Yeah.
they can make that
You can,
call. So
we are so transparent and 24/7. We have families sometimes call us at 4 a.m. saying, I just lost my so and so in the hospital. They just passed away. And you know what? We will take care of you. Don't worry, right? We have you, we have your back. A lot of families feel that if they lose, and we had this, someone told us where they lost their father on a Friday and they didn't realize, because it was Friday night, they didn't realize that the funeral homes, I mean, Eirene was open 24/7. So they didn't realize that funeral homes don't operate on the weekend a lot of time. So they waited till Monday. And then when we told them about Eirene, it's open 24/7, they were like, well, I should have just used Eirene, right? And it was interesting because a lot of families do call us at like 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. on a Saturday, expecting we're not going to be open, but just as a let's just see, because we do say 24/7. A human picks up, a human answers your call, a licensed funeral director will answer your call, take care of you, or a care team coordinator will answer your call and pass you over to a funeral
yeah.
director.
So as we get ready to wrap up here, I want to
Yeah.
make sure that everybody knows. So Eirene Cremations, it's Eirene Cremations, which is cremations.com. You can go there to learn more about this. So at what point, how far did you have to be along? Because so many traditional angel groups, right, will say, I need to have a prototype or a minimal viable product. You got to have a certain amount of revenue, but it seems like your tech on this and what you kind of had to, you had to be all in. You can't just put your toe in the water. So, I mean, I'm certain there was a lot of your own money because you'd had this other success. So you were the classic, all in kind of, entrepreneur putting it together. But at what point did you have to get to before you could get outside capital to help you start to scale?
We started, one of the very interesting things about Toronto community is that there's a lot of entrepreneurs willing to help you out. And so what we did was, both my co-founder Mallory and I, we reached out to our old bosses, we reached out to other tech entrepreneurs we worked with and said, you guys are going to laugh, but we're working on something so wild, you've never heard of it before, disrupting death care. And they'd be like, what? And we have to explain to them, just as I did, like to you, like, here's how the whole thing works. It's a moonshot of an idea because we have to get a regulatory approval, but are you in? And so first we took on a small check size, small friends and family round. We never did a syndicate. I don't think we ever did ended up doing a syndicate ever.
So you didn't
We did
do angel groups. You went from friends and family into institutional.
Yeah, we went friends and family, institutional. And so during that process was interesting because as we grew, we started getting more and more investor interest. And specifically for us, the idea was, we're growing and we have the opportunity to serve more families. How can we expand more? When we launched in Ontario, truth was, we launched in Ontario, but we, on day one, didn't have the tech because we didn't know. One of the things I've learned was, why am I going to build a funeral OS AI when we haven't had one customer? I don't even know what we're going to build for that customer. And so we did everything very manually for the first couple months, just to understand what was going on. And then as we started to hit our stride and we realized that, hey, this thing can scale if we just automated this entire aspect of it, right? And so it was very learning, like building while the plane's flying. We're just like, hey, the funeral director, like I'm observing what's happening. And I'm like, it looks like when we have one person, like our first month we did one. And, okay, great. When we have that one person and I look at our funeral directors, I closely analyze what were the things that you worked on from A to Z. And I said, okay, A to Z, I can automate 25 of those things, 23 of those things. And so I started to do that. And now that we've automated almost everything, it was just a learning experience. And that's how we started to, reach out to VCs, and VCs reached out to us. Just purely based on our scale and how fast we've been growing.
Yeah.
And Funeral OS, we've been running Funeral OS for a year and a half now, and it's just, and we're constantly improving it. I just pushed up updates last night, and
Yeah.
it's just been a game changer for our funeral directors.
So that's I mean, the concept, the idea, the business itself is novel. The funeral OS is, it would probably help regular old funeral homes be more efficient. So do you package that up as under another brand and sell it to funeral homes to be able to do their thing, or is it only you keep it as your total secret sauce that's
It's
only
our
for when
secret
you get
sauce.
ready to exit?
It's our secret sauce right now. I mean, it is what, like it's funny, like you can't even get to Funeral OS online. It is hidden behind a bunch of VPNs, hidden behind a VPN, a login, all the stuff, because it is such a secret sauce for us. Like we don't even share. I don't think we've ever even shared a screenshot of Funeral OS publicly, just to investors and pitch decks that we have, because that is what drives the business. There is a whole lot of IP that we've built there that just helps us move really fast. That it's hard for someone who's not a technology person inside of the death space and has seen, like I said, that actively, like I basically had like an on-the-job experience of what is a funeral home when we launched. Originally when we launched, we were just a website with some like database in the back end. And as I saw what was happening, I'm like, we need to automate everything. This is crazy that we're
Yeah,
doing this.
yeah. I just think it's great. I mean, it's like the business model, listening as much as I know about, business processes of people as they go through in the startup phase. I guess probably because you had spent so much time with all those other startups to
Yes,
understand, the challenges, the hiccups. What's the fatal flaw that they encounter because they get the cart before the horse sometimes, right? And you
absolutely.
get the sequencing. I talk to so many people about, entrepreneurs about sequencing, and don't do B or D element until you know what A and B are going to be. And like the fact that
Absolutely.
you did it all manually, so you knew exactly what the process your business was going to go through, what were the pain points of folks, be able to do that was great. Being able to not try to sell every bell and whistle from the very beginning. I've had this client that I
Absolutely
was
right.
working with, and they're all talking about
Oh,
selling merchandise. And it's like, you don't even have your app fully
exactly.
out there. Don't sell merchandise. People aren't
It's
gonna,
a
you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like, wait
it's a
until you're
common
like a
problem.
brand name and everybody's talking about you before you start selling merchandise. It's like the things that they'll get distracted with. So I would just say, kudos and hats off to you for one, taking the time to gain the experience you have and the sacrifices that you did to gain real life experience along the way, and then being able to apply it in this and your success, to be patient as you were building this up, waiting for your license to be able to do that. And then, just the way the process that you've gone about. And then, so what's next? I mean, is this easily transferable to places outside of Canada? Is there enough commonalities of laws and things like that that you can scale internationally, or
Yeah, we'll
and
be
being
making.
able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, to your actually previous point, what I was going to say was my first business all the way back in 2010. I spent 2 years building it without launching it because I added every single bell and whistle to it. Right? We're like, oh, it'd be a great idea. It'd be a great idea. And Irene, I did the complete opposite. So yes, we are scaling up. There's going to be a whole bunch of cool announcements. 2024 is going to be a big year for us. There's a whole bunch of cool tech that we're working on. We've scaled the team up. We just closed a seed round. So yeah, 2024, you'll see international expansion used for sure.
I'm looking forward to it. And I'm glad that I got in, before you're like on the cover of, some Entrepreneur magazine or something like that. It'll be like, I knew him in the early days. So, you know,
Oh, I appreciate that.
anything you want to, a little gold nugget you want to leave with the listening audience before we say, you know, onwards and upwards?
I think what you said is correct, which is don't spend all that time building. Like you need to just quickly iterate. Iteration. Every time I've done iteration has worked out. Every time I've said I'm gonna sit there and build the whole thing, it's always failed.
Yeah. So very good. Yep, that's it. All
Yeah,
right. Thank you very much, Faisal. And you know, thanks for being on the Compassionate Capitalist show. And we'll probably have you back in another, you'll be too busy next year, but maybe the year after that
sounds
to
good.
talk about the next thing and how you've decided there. You didn't know this at the time, but this is what you learned, and this is how you're doing some
Absolutely.
other kind of an expansion within the
Absolutely.
space.
Sounds good. We'll do that.
Okay. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. Share this and tell us you like it, and onwards and upwards.